All right, welcome back to the Ultimate Mixdown, everyone. So you recorded your YouTube video and you recorded the audio separate into your computer via your audio interface. And now it's time to polish it up and make it really sound good. So we're going to take your audio from the recording and go from this to this. Let's dive right in. Okay, so we recorded a couple takes of the song, and I have a take here that I'm relatively happy with. So now it comes down to doing a little bit of mixing and fine-tuning on those plugins to make sure everything sits nicely and get that good audio quality that we're looking for. This is what it sounds like: dry vocals, dry guitar going directly into the audio interface, coming right out of the software in my computer.
Lying on the floor next to you, watching the headlights come our way.
Okay, so it sounds a little bit dry, a little less lively. I adjusted the guitar a little bit so you could hear more of the vocals. Now let's turn these effects chains back on and let's go into it. And I've already dialed them in for this song, but let me talk to what we're doing here. So we'll start with the vocal track. So let's mute the guitar. And the vocal track, again, I used a condenser microphone, which picks up a lot of the room sound. So it's got the guitar in the background as well. And we need to keep that in mind while we're doing this. So the first thing I do is put on a compressor. Now the idea is to tame the loudest parts of the vocal while also boosting the quieter parts. But we also have the guitar playing, so we don't want to boost too much of the guitar. Otherwise it's going to give kind of a pumping effect. I have a fast attack, so just a few milliseconds, a relatively fast release, so around 110 milliseconds, and then a ratio of 4:1. So the fast attack means that the compressor is going to hit right away on any peaks that are past the threshold. The release means it's going to release the compressor from compressing the audio at a relatively quick rate, so it doesn't sustain that compression for too long. And then the 4:1 ratio is just how much we're reducing the sound if it goes beyond the threshold. So I'm going to use these settings in most instances for these live recordings. And then I just need to adjust the threshold, so I'm affecting it only to the point where you see maybe up to 6 dB of gain reduction. We don't want to go too far beyond that because it's going to sound unnatural. Well, let's take a look.
Lying on the floor next to you, watching the headlights come our way.
So that's actually a pretty good level for the compressor already. So I'm not really going to touch it there. If anything, I might bring the threshold down just a little bit more to do a little bit more compression, but I don't need to go beyond that. Now, if I was doing something of a more gritty vocal and I recorded it with a dynamic microphone, again, one that doesn't pick up as much of the room, then I might throw on a compressor and really compress the vocals. So if it was a hard rock vocal with some grit to it, I would really want to squash it with some compression because that brings out a lot of that heaviness, that harshness that you hear in modern rock songs today. But because this is a lighter, more acoustic rock sound, we want to have a more natural sound to it. 6 dB reduction is more than enough. The next thing is an EQ. The EQ is to cut out more of the unpleasant frequencies and boost some of the more pleasant frequencies. So the EQ curve you see here, it's a relatively typical one. And what we do is we have a high pass filter down here on the low end. And a high pass means we're letting in all of these high frequencies, but we're cutting out all of these low end frequencies. So I have it set to here to about 110 with a relatively steep curve. This cuts out all of this unnecessary information because I'm not actually using any of these frequencies down here, because none of the frequencies down here are pleasant to listen to if they're even audible to begin with. So it's really just eating up headroom that I'd rather keep for other things later on. And then here I just have a slight dip, so something was going on around the 500 hertz range where it would be better to pull it back a little bit. Maybe the guitar was playing a little bit loud here and I didn't want the guitar bleeding into the vocal mic to be too loud. Typically between 4,000 and 6,000 hertz, it starts to add a bit more presence, and then even up from here, it adds airiness to the voice. So what I have is a high shelf. So as I'm boosting this right here, it's going to boost all of these frequencies as well. And then between 2 and 3K, I typically find is one of the sweet spots for tenor or baritone male vocals. So you just play around with the EQ curve and move it back and forth and try to hear when does it make the vocals sound better. And then that's where you kind of boost it a little bit. And I usually boost it anywhere between 3 and 6 dB, sometimes a little bit higher, sometimes not as much. And then if you're trying to figure out, well, what do I cut out? Then another thing you can do is a relatively narrow boost like this, and you can sweep across. And anything that sounds unpleasant, you might want to dial back just a little bit. You don't want to cut out too much because then you start cutting out the pleasant frequencies that you actually want to hear. So again, this is practice over time. You'll get used to it the more that you play with it. So let's listen to it with just the compressor, and then we'll add in the EQ.
Lying on the road next to you, watching the headlights come our way. When it's time for us to move, will you go ahead? I think I'll stay.
That sounds pretty good. If anything, it might be a little bit too much on the presence and airiness, so I would dial these back just a little bit. And just to show you how inaudible this is, but how beneficial it is, let's just play it and listen to what happens when I bring it down and back. You might hear a difference in the guitar. You're probably not going to hear anything in the vocals.
Lying on the road next to you, watching the headlights come our way.
So you can't even hear that affecting the vocals, but it cuts out all this unnecessary information, and that's great to do on all of your tracks, to be honest. And then lastly, I add a little bit of reverb. There's all different types of reverb. Just adds a little bit of room sound to it, so it makes it sound a little bit bigger and three-dimensional. There's ones that have a larger sound or a bigger sound in the space. There's ones that are short and quick. You'll learn over time which ones sound better in which circumstances. Sometimes you might even use a delay instead of a reverb. And the difference is the reverb is the sound of reverberation echoing off of different objects. And these plugins are trying to emulate that. So if you're in a church, for example, and you yell, your voice is going to bounce off of the walls and the ceiling and come back to your ears in different ways. A delay is a time-based plugin where you're trying to set it so that every quarter note or every eighth note or whatever frequency that you're trying to set it at, it will repeat the sound. But as it repeats over and over again, it slowly tapers off so that it doesn't repeat forever. And here I just have 17% wet. So that means that instead of having it 100% on the mix, I only use about 17%. That was enough for this song. And then the size is 50%. So this is how big the reverb is. So how big the reverb is, and then how much of it is applied to the track. So let's just put this on, listen to it. I'll boost the dry wet signal. I'll increase the size, decrease the size, just so you can hear what that does.
Lying on the road next to you, watching the headlights come our way. When it's time for us to move, will you go ahead? I think I'll stay. 'Cause I'm alright with the collision here tonight.
So you could tell as I increased the dry wet signal or the size, the voice kind of got lost in the music a little bit, and it was heavily overkill on the effect. So you don't want to use too much. I probably could have a little bit more reverb on this, but I'm happy with this. It gave a little bit more of a intimate feel for the vocals, and that's what I was going for here. Okay, and then we'll also take a look at the guitar plugins too. So once you blend in the guitar, the first thing you want to listen to is the vocals with the guitar and adjusting the faders so that they line up nicely so the guitars aren't overpowering the vocals, but they're still audible to a good level.
Lying on the road next to you, watching the headlights come our way. When it's time for us to move.
So that's a good sweet spot. All right, so let's pull up our plugins. Now we have these turned on already, but let's take them off and then we'll go one by one. Okay, and we'll keep the vocals on for this. Now, the first track that you mix, obviously it's going to be in isolation, but as you layer other tracks, you want to listen to things in the overall context of the mix. It doesn't make any sense to make the guitars sound the best possible just by themselves, because once you apply the vocals and the guitars together, it might not work. So instead, we're going to keep the vocals on, and then we'll apply these effects to the guitar, make the adjustments, and make sure that they blend nicely every step of the way. All right, so we have the compressor here. And again, another fast attack, relatively fast release. We want the compressor to take those peaks right away and tame them down, but we don't want the compressor to be held too long because we want to be able to hear the quieter parts that come right after those peaks. And this is a ratio of 3-to-1, meaning it doesn't duck it down as much as what we did with the vocals, but it does enough so that we can keep a relatively level volume on the guitars. So let's add this in. We'll adjust the threshold, again looking for up to 6 dB of gain reduction. And one thing I want to emphasize is when you're doing this, you want to do it on the loudest parts of the song. So let's see what's going on here.
Lying on the road next to you, watching the headlights come our way.
And then for the EQ, again, we cut out that low end information that we don't need. You're not going to hear most of it anyway. And then we have a shelf here boosted as well. You don't want to boost this too much because it is competing with the vocals in these frequency ranges. And one thing with EQs is if you boost something in one instrument that shares similar frequency ranges as another instrument, then you need to find a way to create space for all those instruments. So in my vocals, I have this 3K boost here, and then I have this shelf at roughly 5K. So I'm doing the same kind of boost here, and it tends to work for this song. They blend together well in those high frequencies, but I'm not going to boost at the 3K, even if it sounds good on the guitars, because I need that space specifically for the vocals. If anything, I might take it back a little bit on the guitars just so that you can hear the vocal presence even more. What I did was I swept the frequency ranges of the guitar, and I was looking for a frequency that sounds good for the guitars that I could boost for the guitars, if any are there. And I found right here at about 1500 hertz was a really good spot. So I boosted that a little bit. And then again, subtractive EQ. So if you want to add in additional EQ points and you reduce the bandwidth so that it's a relatively narrow peak, and just sweep through and listen. Is there anything that's coming out too harsh or that doesn't sound pleasant? If that's the case, you just dial it back a little bit. Okay, so let's listen to it with and without the EQ.
Lying on the road next to you, watching the headlights come our way.
Okay, so it's subtle, but you can hear that it's not so rumbly on the low end, so there were a few frequencies that we could hear before the EQ kicked in. And then you can hear it with a little bit more presence and airiness on the high end. And then lastly, we add a little bit of reverb here on the guitar as well. Oftentimes you might create a separate track for the reverb and send these two tracks to that reverb. In this case, it's only 2 tracks, so it's okay. The processing isn't going to be too bad. If you had like a 50-track session, you would probably want to create separate buses or separate tracks for your effects like reverb and delay, and then route all of the instruments that go to them so that they can all be processed by the same one plugin instead of individual plugins on every track. Here I found that the dry wet, I boosted it a little bit more on the guitar to 30%, kept the size the same, and it sounds pretty good with the vocals.
Lying on the road next to you.
And it just brings a little bit more ambience to the guitar, and it helps the guitar sound more like it's in the same room being recorded through the same mic as the vocals, even though it's not. Right? This guitar was a direct input, so we just recorded this directly with a 1/4-inch cable into the audio interface from my acoustic electric. So that's a not so quick mixing tutorial, and that's how I mix my songs for YouTube. It all depends on the song, and while I have these presets set up in my effects chains, I always need to tweak them. At the least, I need to tweak the thresholds in the compressors, and I need to tweak the frequencies that I boost or cut in the EQs. Now, while this is a quick and dirty way of getting up and running to have decent audio quality, this is after the performance. In other words, you want to make sure you know the song in and out before you even start recording. A number of the songs that I record on my channel take weeks, if not months, to learn. And then even then, I'm recording take after take after take just to try and get the best capture that I can. Well, I hope this video helped you out. If it did, hit the like button, tell your friends. If you're interested in more videos like this, hit the subscribe button. And as always, I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks for joining the Ultimate Mixdown.